What if the foods you have been calling Spanish your entire life, the dishes that built the romantic mythology of sun-drenched courtyards, terracotta tiles, and centuries of European refinement, were never Spanish at all? What if the flavors that fill tapas menus from Madrid to Manhattan, the ingredients that anchor every cookbook with the word Mediterranean on the cover, were quietly lifted from a civilization that perfected them while most of Europe was still figuring out how to use a fork? What if the Aztecs, a people the history books reduced to a footnote of conquest, were running one of the most sophisticated food cultures on the planet, and Spain spent 500 years rebranding their genius and forgetting to mention where it came from? Hi, my name is David, and this is Food Origins, the show where we pull back the curtain on the foods you grew up eating and find out they came from somewhere you never expected. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe, because today we are going all the way back, past the conquistadors, past the missions, past the ports of Seville and the spice merchants of Cadiz. We are going to the markets of Tenochtitlan, a city that, in the year 1519, was larger than any city in Spain, cleaner than Paris, and feeding 200,000 people from a culinary tradition the Spanish were about to rename and claim as their own. Buckle up, because by the end of this video, you will never look at a bowl of gazpacho the same way again. Food number 1, chocolate. Let's start with the one that hurts the most, because if you have ever stood in a Spanish cafe at 7 in the morning, watching a thick, almost black cup of hot chocolate arrive at your table with a plate of churros for dipping, you have probably assumed that this ritual, this beautiful, slow, indulgent morning custom, is one of the oldest things in Spain. It feels ancient. It feels European in the deepest possible way. It is not even close. Chocolate, in every form that the world now consumes it, comes from the Americas. And the specific tradition of drinking chocolate, hot, frothy, spiced, ceremonially prepared, comes directly from the Aztecs. They called it chocolatl, which translates roughly to bitter water. It was made by grinding roasted cacao beans into a paste, mixing that paste with hot water, chili, vanilla, and sometimes honey, and whisking the whole thing between two vessels held at a height until a thick foam formed on top. The foam was the most important part. The Aztecs believed it was where the soul of the drink lived. Chocolatl was not a casual beverage. It was sacred. It was a currency. Cacao beans were used to pay tribute to the emperor. Montezuma II reportedly drank 50 cups of it a day from a golden goblet, and any goblet he used was thrown into the lake afterwards because no one else was worthy of touching it. That is not consumer behavior. That is mythology. When Hernan Cortes arrived at Tenochtitlan in 1519, he was served chocolatl as a gesture of respect. He took the cacao beans back to Spain. The Spanish court hated the bitter version, so they added cane sugar, removed the chili, kept it warm, and called it chocolate. Within 100 years, hot chocolate was the most fashionable drink in European royal courts. And here's the part that stops people cold. Spain kept the secret of chocolate for almost a century. They did not share it with the rest of Europe until the 1600s. They guarded it the way countries guard state intelligence. A drink invented by indigenous Mexicans was treated as a Spanish national asset. The Aztecs got the bitter water. Europe got the empire. Food number 2, the tomato. I want you to picture, for one moment, a world without tomatoes. No pasta sauce, no pizza, no salsa, no ketchup, no gazpacho, no pan con tomate. No paella with that deep, sun-warmed red color soaking through the rice. A genuinely lesser world. A culinary apocalypse. That world existed in Spain until the 1500s. The tomato is native to the Americas. Wild tomatoes grew in the Andes, but it was the Aztecs who domesticated them, cultivated them, and built an entire flavor culture around them. They called it tomatl, the word that became tomato in nearly every language on Earth. By the time the Spanish arrived in Mexico, the Aztecs were growing dozens of varieties. Yellow, green, striped, large, small, sweet, acidic. They had already worked out the agriculture of selective breeding that European farmers would take another 200 years to reach. When the tomato arrived in Spain in the early 16th century, the Spanish were suspicious of it. So was the rest of Europe. The tomato belongs to the nightshade family, and many of its botanical cousins are poisonous. For decades, Europeans grew tomatoes purely as ornamental plants. Pretty to look at, definitely not for eating. Then, Andalusian farmers in southern Spain, in the warm, dry, sun-baked region around Seville, finally took a bite. And then, they took another. And then they wrote the most important chapter in modern European food history. They put tomato on bread and called it pan con tomate. They blended raw tomato with stale bread, olive oil, garlic, and vinegar, and called it gazpacho. They simmered it down into the base sauce of nearly every Spanish stew, every rice dish, every escabeche. The tomato did not just enter Spanish cuisine, it rewrote it. And somewhere along the way, the world forgot that the tomato had ever been anything but Spanish. Italian cuisine claimed it. French cuisine claimed it. Eastern European borscht acquired a tomato variant. The Middle East built shakshuka. But the original cultivators, the Aztecs, who had been growing tomato for thousands of years before any European set foot on their soil, were quietly erased from the recipe card. A fruit that built half of European food culture was not European. It was indigenous Mexican. And the people who taught the world how to grow it almost never get a single line of credit. Food number 3, the avocado. Now this one is going to make some people uncomfortable, because the avocado has been having such a long, intense, slightly absurd moment in global food culture that you might assume someone, somewhere, has been carefully managing its public image for a very long time. Nobody has. The avocado has been quietly extraordinary for about 10,000 years, and the people responsible are the indigenous civilizations of Mesoamerica. The word avocado itself comes from the Nahuatl word ahuacatl. The Aztecs cultivated avocado trees extensively. They mashed the fruit with tomatoes, chilies, and onions, and called it guacamole, which is the direct linguistic ancestor of the word guacamole. They were eating guacamole on the shores of Lake Texcoco, while the Spanish were still figuring out how to spice a stew. When Spanish conquistadors first encountered avocados in Mexico, they had no reference for the fruit. They tried to describe it in letters home, and largely failed. One Spanish chronicler called it a kind of pear with the consistency of butter. That was as close as the European palate could get to understanding it. The Spanish brought the avocado back to Europe in the 16th century, but it did not catch on. The climate of Spain was wrong for growing it. The fruit did not travel well. For nearly 400 years, the avocado remained an exotic curiosity, mostly grown in Spanish colonies in South America and the Caribbean. Then, in the 20th century, California began commercial avocado cultivation, and by the 1990s, the world was finally ready. Guacamole became a global obsession. Avocado toast became a generational identity marker. The avocado oil industry became a billion-dollar business. And through every wave of that popularity, almost nobody mentioned that the dish we now call guacamole was being prepared in Aztec kitchens 500 years before Cortes arrived. The recipe has barely changed. Avocado, tomato, chili, onion. The Aztecs nailed it on the first attempt, and we have been quietly eating their recipe ever since. Food number 4, vanilla. Vanilla is the most expensive spice in the world by weight, second only to saffron. It flavors nearly every dessert in Western cuisine. It is in your ice cream, your perfume, your candles, your morning coffee, your birthday cake. It is so universally beloved that the word vanilla has come to mean ordinary, plain, default, which is one of the great injustices of the English language. Vanilla is not ordinary. Vanilla is one of the most complicated agricultural products ever created. And it was the Totonac people of what is now Veracruz, Mexico, who first cultivated it. The Aztecs, who conquered the Totonac in the 15th century, took vanilla as tribute and incorporated it into their chocolatl. That is right, the original chocolate drink was vanilla flavored. The Aztecs invented chocolate and vanilla together, as a single concept, as a sacred pairing. The Spanish, watching Montezuma drink his royal cup of vanilla-spiced chocolatl, took both ingredients back to Europe. And here is where the story becomes deeply, beautifully strange. Vanilla orchids only produce vanilla pods when they are pollinated by a specific species of bee, the Melipona bee, which lives only in Mexico. For nearly 300 years, Europe could not produce vanilla outside of Mexico. They planted the orchids. The orchids grew. The orchids never fruited. Spain held a near monopoly on the global vanilla trade for centuries, simply because nobody could figure out the biology. It was not until 1841 that a 12-year-old enslaved boy named Edmond Albius, working on a French plantation on the island of Réunion, discovered a method of hand-pollinating vanilla orchids using a small wooden stick. His technique is still used today. Every single vanilla bean produced outside of Mexico exists because of what a 12-year-old boy worked out in an afternoon. But the original cultivators, the Totonac, who had been growing vanilla for centuries before any European arrived, are barely a footnote in most vanilla histories. The Aztecs, who pioneered the chocolate-vanilla pairing, are not mentioned on a single bottle of vanilla extract. The marketing prefers the word exotic. The marketing does not prefer the word indigenous. Food number 5, the chili pepper. If you ask the average person on the street where chili peppers come from, you will get a wide range of answers. India, Thailand, China, Mexico, if you are lucky. Spain is rarely the answer, which is correct, because chili peppers are not Spanish. But the entire global spread of chili peppers, from Sichuan cooking to Indian curries to Hungarian paprika to Korean kimchi, runs directly through Spain. And the original genius behind every variety of chili on Earth belongs to the indigenous peoples of Mesoamerica. The Aztecs were growing dozens of varieties of chili. They had names for each one. Chiltepin, the wild ancestor, Poblano, Serrano, Ancho, Pasilla, Guajillo. They used them fresh, dried, smoked, ground, fermented. They built entire flavor categories around heat levels and smoke profiles. The Aztec markets of Tenochtitlan sold chilies in the same way modern French markets sell cheese, with knowledge, hierarchy, and pride. When Columbus encountered chili peppers in the Caribbean in 1492, he was so confused that he simply called them peppers, the closest word he had, even though they had absolutely nothing in common with the black pepper Europe had been importing from India for centuries. That naming mistake stuck. We still call them peppers today. We are still using a misidentification from 1492. The Spanish carried chili peppers back to Europe and then on to Africa, Asia, and the Middle East through their colonial trade routes. Within 100 years, chili peppers had spread to every inhabited continent. The cuisines that adopted them transformed beyond recognition. Indian food before chili peppers had heat, but it came from black pepper. Sichuan food before chili peppers existed in a completely different flavor register. Korean kimchi was not even red until chili peppers arrived in the 17th century. Everything you think of as classically spicy food in nearly every culture on Earth is technically post-Columbian. And every one of those cuisines owes its heat to an Aztec agricultural inheritance. Food number 6, corn. Corn is so deeply embedded in the modern world that we forget it had to come from somewhere. It is in your cereal, your tortillas, your cornbread, your popcorn, your fuel, your animal feed. The United States alone produces 360 million metric tons of corn every single year. It is the most produced grain on the planet. Corn does not grow wild. There is no wild corn. The plant cannot reproduce without human intervention. It was created, deliberately and patiently, over thousands of years by indigenous farmers in southern Mexico. Specifically, in the region of Oaxaca, approximately 10,000 years ago. From a wild grass called teosinte, a plant that looks almost nothing like corn, indigenous Mesoamerican farmers selectively bred a crop that became the foundation of every great civilization in the Americas. The Aztecs called it centli. The Maya called it ixim. The plant was so central to their lives that the Maya creation myth in the Popol Vuh literally describes human beings as being made from corn. Not metaphorically, theologically. We were made from corn. Corn made us. There is no separation between the crop and the people. When the Spanish arrived in Mexico, they recognized the agricultural genius of corn immediately. They took it back to Europe. They took it to Africa. They took it across their global trade routes. Within 2 centuries, corn was feeding millions of people across multiple continents who had never even heard of Mesoamerica. Spain itself incorporated corn into rural cooking, particularly in the north. Galician cornbread, Basque corn polenta. These are dishes that feel old and regional and European. They are also a direct inheritance from indigenous Mexican agriculture, refined for 10,000 years by people whose names we do not know and whose contributions we have largely forgotten. A crop that built the modern world was built by hand over centuries in the valleys of southern Mexico. Europe took it, the world ran on it, and the original architects became invisible. Food number 7, pumpkin and squash. This one is going to make you reconsider every autumn you have ever had. Every pumpkin spice latte, every roasted butternut squash, every Spanish stew thickened with calabaza, every bowl of crema de calabacín that arrives at a Madrid restaurant with a swirl of olive oil and a few toasted seeds on top. Pumpkins and squash, the entire cucurbit family that anchors autumn cooking across Europe and North America, are American. They were domesticated in Mesoamerica between 8 and 10,000 years ago, making them one of the oldest cultivated foods in human history. The Aztecs called them ayotli. They grew them in the famous Three Sisters method, alongside corn and beans, in a polyculture so efficient and so nutritionally complete that modern agronomists still study it as a model of sustainable farming. The Aztecs used every part of the plant. The flesh was roasted, boiled, made into soups and porridges. The seeds, what we now call pepitas, were toasted and ground into a sauce called pipián, the ancestor of the modern Mexican mole verde. The blossoms were stuffed and fried. Nothing was wasted. A single squash plant fed a family for weeks. When the Spanish arrived, they took pumpkins and squashes back to Europe immediately. The Mediterranean climate suited them. Spanish cooks began incorporating calabaza into stews, soups, and side dishes. Italy adopted them into ravioli fillings. France built crème de potiron. The British turned them into pies and bread. North America turned them into a holiday. And none of these cuisines would have had pumpkin or squash to work with if not for 10,000 years of indigenous Mesoamerican plant breeding. The Aztecs handed Europe a fully developed agricultural product, and Europe built half of its autumn cuisine around it without ever mentioning where it came from. Food number 8, the peanut. This one might surprise you, because the peanut feels like such a universally distributed food that you might assume it has no single origin. American peanut butter, African peanut stews, Thai peanut sauce, Indonesian satay, Chinese kung pao chicken, Spanish turrón made with peanuts in some regional variations. The peanut is everywhere, doing everything in every cuisine. It comes from one place, South America. And it was cultivated extensively by indigenous peoples across Mesoamerica, including the Aztecs, who called it tlalcacahuatl, which translates roughly to ground cacao, because the peanut grows underground the same way the cacao bean develops inside its pod. The Aztecs roasted peanuts, ground them into pastes, mixed them with chilies and chocolate to create the earliest known versions of what we now call mole sauce. The Spanish carried peanuts out of Mexico and along their trade routes. The peanut moved through Spain to West Africa, where it was rapidly adopted into local cuisines because the climate suited it and the nutritional value was extraordinary. From West Africa, the peanut crossed back to North America during the transatlantic slave trade, brought aboard ships by enslaved Africans who knew how to grow and cook with it. The peanut that anchors the American South today is technically a return migration. It came from Mexico, went to Spain, went to Africa, and finally arrived in the United States in the holds of slave ships. The Aztecs were grinding peanuts into chocolate sauce, while Europe was still arguing about whether the peanut was even a plant or a strange kind of underground egg. And the global peanut industry today, worth tens of billions of dollars, traces its agricultural foundation to an indigenous Mesoamerican crop that almost nobody credits anymore. Food number 9, the turkey. Let's talk about a bird, specifically the bird that anchors the most American holiday of the calendar, the bird whose name in English happens to be the name of a country in the Middle East, the bird that has confused linguists, historians, and ornithologists for centuries. The turkey is American. The wild turkey is native to North America and Mesoamerica. The domesticated turkey, the version that ends up on holiday tables, was domesticated twice. Once by the indigenous peoples of the American Southwest, and a second, independent time, by the Aztecs in central Mexico. The Aztecs called it huexolotl, which through Spanish became guajolote, the word still used for turkey in Mexican Spanish today. The Aztecs kept domesticated turkeys in significant numbers. They were a primary protein source. They were also used in religious ceremonies, traded as commodities, and offered as tribute to the emperor. When Spanish conquistadors arrived, they recognized the turkey as a domesticated bird suitable for European farming. They took turkeys back to Spain in the early 16th century. Within a few decades, the turkey had spread across Europe. The English called it a turkey because they confused it with guinea fowl, which had been imported through Turkey. The French called it dinde, a contraction of poule dinde, chicken from India, because they confused the Americas with India, a confusion that traces all the way back to Columbus. The Portuguese called it Peru because they associated it with Peru, which was geographically closer, but still wrong. Every single European country that adopted the turkey gave it a name that misidentified where it came from. The bird was Aztec, and Europe could not agree on a single accurate label for it for 5 centuries. The Spanish turkey, the cocido madrileno that occasionally features turkey, the smoked turkey breast that appears on tapas menus, every European preparation of turkey traces back to a bird that the Aztecs had been raising in their courtyards for generations before any Spaniard knew it existed. Food number 10. Beans. We end with something that might seem too humble, too ordinary, too daily to deserve its own entry. Beans. The legume that anchors nearly every cuisine on Earth. The pinto bean in your Tex-Mex, the black bean in your Cuban rice, the kidney bean in your chili, the white bean in your Tuscan ribollita, the garbanzo in your Spanish stew, the judíon gigante in your Asturian fabada, the lentil in your Indian dal. Beans built civilization. And the bean family as we know it today, the common bean, Phaseolus vulgaris, was domesticated in Mesoamerica by indigenous farmers over 7,000 years ago. The Aztecs grew them extensively as part of the Three Sisters polyculture, alongside corn and squash. They called them etl, and they had dozens of varieties in colors that European farmers had never imagined. Black, white, red, mottled, striped, golden. The Aztec diet was nutritionally extraordinary. The combination of corn, beans, and squash provides a complete protein, all essential amino acids, fiber, vitamins, and complex carbohydrates. The Aztecs were not just feeding themselves. They had engineered, through observation and trial, one of the most balanced agricultural systems in human history. When the Spanish arrived, they took beans back to Europe, and Spanish cuisine absorbed them so completely that you cannot now imagine traditional Spanish cooking without them. Fabada asturiana is built on white beans from the Americas. Cocido madrileño features garbanzos, which originated in the Middle East, but also frequently includes American beans. Almost every regional Spanish stew was reshaped by the arrival of New World legumes. And the same thing happened across Europe. Italian cuisine adopted cannellini and borlotti, both descended from Mesoamerican beans. French cuisine built cassoulet around white beans. British cuisine eventually adopted baked beans, originally an indigenous American preparation that the Pilgrims learned from the Wampanoag people. The Aztec contribution to global cuisine is so foundational that removing it would collapse half the recipes in every cookbook on every shelf. And yet the credit, the cultural ownership, the marketing of these dishes still flows almost entirely to the European countries that received them, not the indigenous civilizations that created them. 10 foods. 10 quiet acts of culinary erasure. 10 ingredients that the world calls Spanish, or Mediterranean, or simply ordinary, that were in fact developed, refined, and perfected by the Aztecs and their Mesoamerican neighbors over thousands of years before a single Spanish ship ever appeared on the horizon. This is not a story about theft exactly. Food has always traveled. Food has always been carried across borders by traders, soldiers, immigrants, and exiles. The tomato was always going to leave Mexico. The chocolate was always going to leave Tenochtitlan. The chili pepper was always going to spread. What went wrong is the story we told about it afterwards. We let the Spanish version become the only version. We let pan con tomate sound older than the tomato itself. We let Spanish hot chocolate become a 500-year-old tradition without mentioning that it is built on a 1,000-year-old Aztec ritual. We let the marketing replace the history. And knowing the difference, sitting with it, telling the older story honestly, that is the whole point of this show. I am David. This is Food Origins. If this changed the way you see your next plate of patatas bravas, or your next cup of Spanish hot chocolate, or your next bowl of gazpacho, hit that like button and subscribe, because we have stories exactly like this one lined up for cuisines and countries that are going to completely rearrange the way you see your table. Tell me in the comments which one of these surprised you the most. I have a feeling the vanilla one is going to start arguments. And honestly, good. Some arguments are worth having.